Great. Well, I'm happy that you're all here. I'm going to moderate. I'm going to throw questions at you, and want this to sort of be interactive. We've basically got three areas that we sort of prepped and talked about. First off, sort of AI, right? We can't have a conversation these days without AI. Spend some time on that. We'll spend some time on third-party risk or vendor management, and then we'll sort of try to wrap up with a little bit about zero trust and then burnout and mental health. And hopefully, we have enough time. I think we could probably do an hour on any one of these topics, but we'll start with AI because it's such a hot topic right now. And I think just curious from the panel's perspective, what you're seeing, what are you doing, policy wise, technology wise, just sort of get the conversation started. I think maybe we'll start with Patty and sort of let you take the lead on this one and offer some of your perspective.
Sure, happy to start. So Babson is very much all in on AI. I know there's a lot of colleges and universities that are sort of taking the wait and see approach, but we had faculty reaching out to us over a year ago asking to integrate AI into our classrooms. So we looked at it from a holistic approach, and we wanted to be able to offer AI tools, particularly Gen AI tools, to our faculty, staff, and students. We're a Microsoft shop, so we standardized on Copilot, and we started to roll that out probably a good, I would say, 9 months ago to our entire population. At that time, we also became really concerned with the security around using Gen AI. I think it was the Samsung news and how they had employees use open Gen AI tools and had lost proprietary data multiple times. So we actually created a Gen AI policy for our employees last January, instructing them to only use closed AI tools with any confidential or proprietary information. And of course, we allow open AI tools from a student perspective and a faculty perspective, as long as they're using non-confidential and non-proprietary data. We've also started to see the desire to roll out more advanced AI things like chatbots in both the classroom and outside of the classroom. And the AI tools are actually getting so much better that you can now have low code, no code tools that your end users can use to generate pretty sophisticated chatbots and AI things. So then, of course, from a security perspective, we got worried about the governance around that and who's reviewing that beforehand. So we actually we're forming an AI governance committee, which is comprised of faculty and staff, to look at the security and risk, as well as look at things from both a curriculum perspective and an operations perspective. And recently, as part of the governance process, we're actually building out frameworks, which we're sharing through governance, of what's the approval for testing of AI? Because you have to worry about hallucinations, you have to worry about bias, you have to worry about all of those things from a risk perspective. And so we actually just yesterday came up with a flow of how we're going to approve and move things into production, whether it's created by a faculty member or a staff member based on the type of data and those things. So spending a lot of time in that area around particularly risk compliance. And then I think the last piece of that we're also spending time on is copyright, which seems to be just a higher ed issue because, how faculty members love to copyright information. There's a lot of questions. What can you copyright? What can't you copyright from a risk perspective? So we're actually building guidance for our faculty and our staff around how Gen AI fits into the copyright world.
So there's so much to think about, and I know Dave, you've had some thoughts or some where you guys are headed at Bridgewater State on your direction you're taking.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Brian. So similar to other higher eds, we have committees, and our committees sometimes have subcommittees. So at BSU, we have a university-wide AI committee, and then we have multiple subcommittees. We're kind of looking at AI from those different perspectives, because folks in academic affairs might be looking at AI differently than folks in procurement, and folks in procurement might be looking at AI differently than my colleagues in IT. So, for example, some of us techies and some of us security people might be looking at AI from a risk perspective, right? We see the Atlas matrix from MITRE, and there are so many different things to consider when securing AI, because it can touch so many parts of higher education. So we're going slow in integrating all of those concerns, hopefully into a university-wide AI policy, and then integrating some of the smaller things about AI, such as what to ask for during the procurement process that Patty mentioned. We'll be bolstering some of our existing processes around that.
And I think that's a neat sort of overlap. And I know, we're going to talk about third party and vendor risk, and part of that is that contract language. And I know Alex has spent some time sort of considering, what controls and things you should be looking at writing, and the language, right, as you come in. So I'll let Alex, you can expand on that a little bit, and sort of complement what Dave just talked about.
Yeah, so we've seen it in higher education, the adoption of AI over the past year, couple of years, even before it really boomed. It started out with the use of the chatbots. A lot of institutions have IT web help desks that students can chat through there, share information about their devices, what IP address they're on, all those kind of things. And we started digging into this at a lot of the different institutions, in that we were trying to figure out what was the best way to go ahead and make sure that the data is not being captured or stored or processed inappropriately by not just the third party vendor, but their fourth parties. From a data privacy standpoint, where is the data being stored? How is it being made publicly available, or is it not? And this was really before even the most recent process of defining in AI confidential and restricted information that we've been doing for years at institutions. So what we've done is a lot of the institutions have gone ahead and ramped up their AI use cases in their security and privacy assessments for vendors. And what we've seen is that a lot of vendors have been really great about adopting AI language into their contracts or into their security reviews. So in higher education, we use the HECVAT, the Higher Education Community Vendor Assessment Toolkit. We refer to SOC 2 reports and additional security documentation. And there sometimes we will see a roadmap of whether a vendor plans to integrate AI in the software after the date that you sign an agreement, or if they leave it out, but they say, well, our fourth parties are doing it and we process the data and hand it to our fourth party, then those are things that we have to put in compensating controls into the contract language. At some of the institutions I've been involved with, we have added in language around not collecting data, not sharing schema information, IP address information. Geolocation services has been another thing that has been shared in some cases with AI, and we try to limit that as well. AI, as great as it is, and we try to be a business enabler, not a business hinderer, through the use of our negotiations with these vendors. Often we have seen that the vendors themselves are learning with us as we go through this process. So they're very interested in adopting a lot of this contractual language that they use themselves for their own third and fourth parties. AI in the contract phase, depending on what type of data you have in your data classification guides at your institutions, sometimes that data we have seen pop up on the public web. We have seen that information been shared if it's learning based off of who's in your environment and what rules you put in place. We have also seen several times that that the language that's used is often misaligned with the acceptable use policies and procedures at the institution. So a lot of higher education is actually going through a realignment right now, and they're negotiating of the vendor contracts, what is their risk tolerance at the institutions, and what they're looking to adopt and what's appropriate.
Yeah, and I think I think for all of us, right, sort of the what's being used, how it's being accessed. I think many of us on LinkedIn recently found out that our friends at Microsoft and LinkedIn were using sort of everything in our LinkedIn environments to train the AI model, right, without sort of opted us in. So understanding sort of what that, maybe it was a change in the EULA that nobody noticed, but being able to review that. And I think that's probably a good sort of segue. I know, Lorna, we had talked a little bit about sort of the HECVAT and AI around third party and risk management for you. Maybe it's a good way to sort of move from AI into more of the how are we managing vendors, and sort of take what Alex just said around contract reviews and talk a little bit about that more in general, not just AI, but third party risk and that type of stuff.
Certainly, certainly. So as I think all of us have felt, it has been a year and a half, 2 years of third-party incidents, third, fourth, whatever party you want to go. And so it has really caused us to make some shifts in how we're looking at things. And really it's the entire life cycle. So we'd already had put in place some standard contract language and things that we want to have in place. We're working on AI, getting that added into our standard language. Doesn't mean most of the vendors that we work with will let us use our contract. So hopefully we are trying to negotiate these things back in. From the concern around the university of trying to help people understand that these third parties and what risk they give to us with regards to what they're using with the data, are they using AI, and from a supply chain, if they go down. And a lot of people don't understand, especially in higher ed, how we depend on certain key single points of failure from our vendors. So helping people understand, and CrowdStrike was a valuable eye opener for me to start having other conversations. Well, look at all the other things that you're depending on. So some of the things that I've struggled with in right sizing is how we do our reviews. So we do the contract part, we do security reviews. And it's frustrating because the amount of time you put into your security reviews, does it really return on the value? Because it doesn't prevent the incidents. So, we're looking at how do we right size? We're looking at, do they seem to have a good enough program? Do they seem to get it? And then how do we look into that down the road? From an AI perspective, we've just added that into our security review questionnaires. I'm looking forward to, I assume that at some point Educause will add it into the HECVAT. And those have been helpful. And the interesting journey with regards to talking, putting these into the questionnaires and how we're asking, is that the vendors don't understand. And getting to somebody to be able to answer the questions about what are you doing with AI? Is it even a closed AI? Or are you using open? Do you have a contract? Because they're becoming our third, fourth party. And everybody wanting to sign up for tools to help them, which I 100% support. I think there's a lot of enablement, but we got to help people understand the risks of what data they're putting into there. Another interesting part that's come in from the from the third parties is, and if y'all haven't done this, is really thinking about your whole incident response process and helping, at a big institution like we're in, a lot of people like to do things to help out. And so we'll see third parties having issues and individuals in other groups trying to take on things about making decisions about notices and what to tell people. And, there's a lot of challenges around that. So third party is definitely something that we have been looking at from an IR perspective and the whole life cycle.
And I'll just add, I love that the prevention, it's more about preparation, right? And I'll drop a link. I did a blog on, I think there's this intersection of third-party risk management and IR, as you discussed, right? Doing those questionnaires and understanding the risks these vendors bring into our organizations don't prevent that risk entirely, right? We just have to be able to use that to help us gauge and prepare for, like you said, a CrowdStrike as a learning and teaching moment. So Dave, I know you had some thoughts on what your program looks like at Bridgewater, and I just wanted to let you jump in a little bit here.
Sure thing. I've been unabashedly stealing Brian Kelly's phrase of their risk is our risk. I'm sure my colleagues are probably tired of me saying that. I've also added in the phrase requisite due diligence, because sometimes it doesn't really seem like this well really has a bottom. So where we're at right now is we have a policy that requires a security review. And of course, it's a flow chart for vendors storing confidential information. So there are pretty much three ways folks can purchase things. One is through that rec and PO process that IT is the gatekeeper of, so I'm very comfortable with that. The other way is through RFPs and bids, and that's IT security partnering up with our procurement office on that process. The third one that we're really looking to start working on next is through Pro Cards, which is folks purchasing things on credit cards. And where we're probably going to end up on that one is every few months getting a report of all the Pro Card purchases and looking for software that folks have purchased, and then reaching out reactively to those departments to ask them what data are they storing, and if they are storing anything confidential, that'll be kind of our reminder to say, hey, geez, let's ask for that SOC 2 Type 2 report from the vendor, and if they don't have that, let's ask for some other security documentation from them.
I'm going to pause for a second. Nick, I saw that you had a question. The question came into you. Do you want to read, or do you want me to go through it?
I'll let you do it. You got a good flow.
Yeah, so just looking at chat so Nick forwarded one of the questions from the audience is they wanted to remain anonymous. What are the most surprising things encountered with AI becoming part of our risk management ecosystem? So I guess that's to any one of the four of you. What were you most surprised about as you were sort of going through that process, Dave? Maybe Dave, because you sort of just talked about it a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I would say the most surprising part about AI is it is kind of an evolving technology. And the other part that's really surprised me are the number of products that are either integrating AI into the software, or they're starting to integrate AI into the software. So most of our contracts, because we're a state entity, a agency of the Commonwealth, most of our contracts end on June 30th and start up on July 1. So we want to be ready between now and July 1 of next year to be ready for all those new products, those new softwares that folks are integrating AI into. So that's probably been the most surprising thing to me is the number of products that have AI in them right now.
Patty, I see you sort of agreeing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think probably the most challenging thing for me is at least the technology is changing so rapidly, and we're seeing it in everything across the board. And our sort of tools and technologies that we have in place haven't caught up. Like the HECVAC doesn't have the right questions yet. So we as leaders, security leaders, have to make sure we compensate for things that aren't caught up by adding those additional AI questions to assess vendors, like Lorna said. The way that AI is being used in security, we just did some education. Deepfakes is now one of the newest ways that AI criminals are trying to use AI to trick people into whether it's money or other things, and staying on top of that and educating people of the constant threats that are out there, whether it's deepfakes or procurement is another large area. I think it's quite a challenge.
And I
Yeah.
would just add that sort of the new buzzword that know before, and Perry Carpenter's talking about, is cheap fakes, because it's gotten so accessible and easy and cheap to make sort of deep fakes, and how that's going to change. And Lorna, before you jump in, I often wonder too, as I haven't seen a ton of these contracts between either Lorna or Alex or all of you. Do you see that some of the vendors don't really have a clear distinction when they say AI? It's sort of like saying cyber, right? It's just a catchphrase, and they're really not.
Yeah.
It's not whether it's a large language model, or it's automation, or it's machine learning. It's just all AI. Has that been any surprising or challenge? And I'll let Lorna, you can go, and then Alex maybe chime in on all of it.
Yeah, and actually that's part of I was going to mention about the surprise is it shouldn't be in retrospect, but everybody always likes to follow the new greatest shiny thing, and companies are so good at adapting their marketing quickly. So the thing that's been difficult and surprising is the speed at which the vendors are getting this into our environment, and our community is deciding, oh, let's jump on it and use it, don't even understand what the AI is providing to them. What purpose is it serving in your tool that you're buying or that you're selling? And so that's been interesting, because once we dig into it, we find out, well, they really didn't need that feature, and it's in a different module. So if we can catch it, trying to talk to people during the process to understand what data they're putting into it, and it doesn't have all the right controls. But man, it's the speed of light, I feel like.
Yeah, Brian, can I add one more thing on that too? I'm not sure if anybody's been following the EU AI Act, and of course, the United States is way behind Europe, right? But the controls that they have outlined of the type of data that you use in AI is really important. But if you own a system like, say, Workday, which is actually has AI built into maybe screening employees, and that's considered high risk, we have to worry about all those things now, because the vendors that we are actively engaged with are releasing AI built into maybe business processes that we shouldn't actually roll out AI. And so that's another concern as well.
Great point. Over to you, Alex. Alex, anything to color that with?
Yeah, I was just going to add that, some of the challenges that I've seen in higher education, specifically around AI, is really that AI governance piece and understanding where it ties in. Tracking down who's using what data on campus is always a challenge. For example, at some institutions, I've seen that IT departments, security departments are unfamiliar with the fact or unaware that research on college campuses is being read by AI. So there may be DoD contracts or things, secure, confidential, restricted information, where students or even faculty are using AI to expedite a project, some type of a procedure there, not realizing that the AI that they're using seems harmless, but really it's capturing that data and is leaving your network, it's leaving your environment. So that's really important. And then I think Patty had mentioned about the EU AI Act. Data erasures are really difficult. Getting in touch with some of these vendors who have integrated AI. Now there's those like Microsoft. We have used Copilot. And then there's Workday, and then you have like ChatGPT. Students and faculty put information in there. Some of the vendors will not work with you, even through the contract negotiation phase, the data erasure phase, any of that, unless you have a educational license with them. They will not even answer the phone. They won't take calls. So trying to get that out there is really important, and understanding when you do these security reviews, what is the likelihood that you're going to be able to get that data back should you have some type of a leak of it?
It's a great point. I guess that's a question for some of the others around sort of research in AI and how it's impacting research. And probably maybe Lorna, with you and all the research in the medical side, maybe there's a near and dear to your heart with that part of it.
Oh, yeah. So we're an R1 research institution. We do significant global, presence in how we do our research projects. And I have been amazed at the creative ways that our researchers are trying to incorporate AI, or thinking they can develop their own AI, or thinking they can hire somebody a person in India or somewhere else just to develop something for them and apply it to sensitive data. And so it's just crazy. I mean, we've got between all our human subject research is supposed to go through an institutional review board. And so we're catching some of it there, but the complications in trying to unwind it from their research, by that point, they've already put their protocol together. So, and they don't get, that you're losing control of that data.
Any last comments on sort of third party and AI? We're gonna jump over to another acronym on ZTA.
I would just say that it's really important to understand what the intentions are of the third-party vendor you're using. The number one thing that we ask for now in higher education is a security roadmap from the vendors, a product roadmap, a privacy roadmap, knowing what is coming down the pipeline, depending on the institution. Some institutions will sign a contract and purchase a software one time, and then they don't look at it again for another 3 or 4 years. Some institutions do annual reviews, even though the contract isn't up, just to do a security review again and say, okay, how are we using this? What's the risk to the institution? So it's important to ask for those roadmaps and understand those, and the vendor should share those as well.
And institutionally have that function for an annual review versus a one and done, right? I think that's what we're all trying to mature toward, is being able to go back and engage with those procurement offices and the contracting and do that. Are we all there yet? Maybe not. So I mentioned zero trust, the zero trust architecture. When this first came out in higher ed, I thought it was akin to for higher ed when we talk about zero trust in an environment where we trust everyone. Some of us are old enough to remember the Lockheed Martin kill chain, which was a really good construct to understand the attack methods. But man, you couldn't say kill chain in higher ed. No one wants to hear that. So it didn't resonate. And I think we're struggling a little bit with zero trust as a concept and an idea in higher ed when it's some basic table stakes. So we sort of give you each an opportunity to sort of talk through that. I know, Lorna, you've got some stuff that you're working on that maybe is a better articulation of zero trust, and it's maybe always trust or trust but verify in
Yes.
how we package it in higher ed. So I'll let you talk to that a little bit.
Certainly. Thank you, Brian. Most of you, those of you that are from higher ed, I'm sure you understand there is, especially on the technology side in some sort, you have a lot of technical debt. And, if you really want to build an ecosystem of zero trust, you have to have a healthy ecosystem. You have to build in the different components of how this is going to work. So we're a ways from adding in some, vendor tools that are meant to kind of really check that everywhere you go. But one of the key things that we've realized is the first step is you've got to have good information about people, and you have to be able to do good authentication. So who are you on the front end, and on the back end, are you fixing the authentication? And so there's two different pathways that we're going right now. One is we are trying to overhaul and pick through what we can change of our identity management stack. It's developed probably over 20 plus years. It's been customized and all kinds of things. So, what are we doing in that? And one of the first things that we decided was most important was actually to create an identity store. Now we're just starting down this pathway. But have a separate identity store that will gather enough information about people, good contact information, more importantly to the university, preferred pronouns, preferred names, and then we use that to kind of feed things down the pathway. The other part is getting that early enough in the process so we get the right data. I mean, in any organization, having duplicate names is a challenge. So how do you manage that and make sure that nobody's making typos along the way? The other flip side of what we have been really struggling with, and I assume many others have as well from watching the Ren Isaac feeds, is duo fatigue, a lot of duo attacks, and they're really hitting our community hard with our community accepting 2FAs. So we've implemented the duo risk based access. It has a lot of promise. It's already done some good things for us, but it's not without its problems. And so, it still has a lot of false negatives that it's not helping with. So we continue to look at kind of that how do we make sure that we aren't letting people in, or people aren't letting people in because they just got tired of getting duo pushes or calls.
Duo fatigue.
Yeah.
Dave or Patty?
I'm happy to jump in on this. So like Lorna, we're sort of in a similar boat. We have a 20-year-old homegrown IAM system, which we are trying to move to formal IAM to make sure that we have a good, strong handle on identities as sort of phase one. We had duo fatigue as well, and we switched to Microsoft Authenticator, which erases duo fatigue because you actually have to key in code every single time, which helps with stronger multi-factor. So that's helped. We recently completed a network segmentation project to again address sort of that zero trust and set up zones on our network. But my concern with zero trust is actually the cloud. We are sort of a cloud first organization. We've got actually our most sensitive data sits in the cloud with SaaS-based apps, our ERP, our CRM. We're moving more and more to the cloud, even with our Microsoft Office and SharePoint and things like that. So we're starting to also evaluate zero trust software products that can help us manage things in the cloud. And I was at an audit committee meeting probably 6 months ago. The president asked me relative to AI, he's like, how can you prevent an employee from using an open AI tool with confidential data? And I said, I can't. We have a policy, but I can't physically prevent it. But some of the zero trust software products can prevent it. And so that's why we're going to look at sort of that option as well to make sure we've got the complete picture in place.
Alex, Dave?
I can jump in. We're kind of picking and choosing which of those zero trust architecture principles we want to follow, and that really makes sense for the institution. We've been using phrases like, we don't want to boil the ocean, and we want to shrink that ocean of risk down into a lake or down into a pond or even, down into a puddle. We had a really big galvanizing project last year. BSU has a cyber range where students can go in. It's kind of like like pilots use a flight simulator before they can actually fly a plane. BSU students can go into the cyber range before they're put into a live environment in their jobs. So part of the cyber range, what we were able to do, it was a really neat proof of concept where the computers in there are not on the actual, they're not on the actual domain, because we're going to have guests coming in there. They're going to need guest access to those computers inside of the cyber range. So those computers are cloud only. It's completely isolated and segmented from the rest of the network. So it was really neat seeing 4 or 5 IT departments kind of pitch in and build out this really great proof of concept zero trust area. That we're not if something were to happen on that network segment, it wouldn't affect it just wouldn't affect production.
And it probably served to, it was a good exercise, sort of a low risk environment to do that in. You weren't possibly going to disrupt operations, right back to that, enabling business piece, but also a great opportunity for everybody to see it in action, right? What the value proposition of it is, right? So it's a really interesting way to do it. And I dropped a link for the range in chat, so folks that aren't familiar with it can take a look at it and see all the excellent. And seeing it in person is even cooler. But definitely take a look at the link. Yeah, it's great. Alex, anything from your side?
Yeah, I just think it's really interesting, to understand the different security journeys of different institutions in higher education and the zero trust model, understanding what data that they have on their campuses, on-prem and in the cloud, and how to secure that most sensitive data. Zero trust is thought of as this hard shell with a GUI center, and trying to protect that most sensitive information at the institution is really this is challenging. It's not an easy thing to do. It does take time in order to properly transition over. I mean, it depending on the size of your institution, if you're centralized or decentralized, it could take months to years. It's a long process. But I think a lot of the institutions that I have worked with and seen have taken those appropriate steps, which meet the level of compliance for other security frameworks and whatnot, by taking those initial steps towards zero trust models.
Cool. And we've got a couple of questions that came in from the group or from chat into Nick, and it's sort of I think they'll both sort of help us segue to the next topic. But I'll start with sort of a question around what role, if any, do you see students playing in your institution's cybersecurity efforts? Have you had success in involving them in any programs, initiatives to improve security overall? So I know, Dave, you just talked about the range and sort of having the students be involved. And I know Cyber Trust Mass and Bridgewater State are working to sort of integrate those students into real world so they can help municipalities. So I'll let you talk about that a little bit. And then Patty and Lorna, if you've got examples, feel free to chime in.
Absolutely. And thank you, Brian. So just to give folks a little overview of Cyber Trust Massachusetts. BSU is a member school of Cyber Trust Massachusetts. And one of the great things about Cyber Trust is that they provide the range platform for students. So those are all the labs that students can do to assign permissions to files for offense and defense cybersecurity exercises. In addition to that, Cyber Trust Massachusetts is staffing a SOC at Bridgewater State University with students and some professional staff to monitor local municipalities in the region. And I've been at BSU for a very long time, and I can very much attest to how much community service absolutely resonates with the students in the region, because the majority of our students are coming from the region. So when they have an opportunity to give back to their communities and help out, learn, and make money all at the same time, it's really it creates a very powerful program where students are getting paid to learn, getting certifications, as well as completing their 4-year, hopefully 6-year academic journey at BSU.
And I'll just add, we've hired a graduate here at Compass IT Compliance. We have a BSU program graduate, so turning out real world experience that translates to full-time employment. So, Patty, Lorna, anything at your institutions from student labor or engagement?
Yeah, we have several different things that we're doing with the students. First and foremost, we've had one of our security classes that are taught at the university encourages the students to do pen testing. And so as part of their journey about learning. And so, we've early on decided it would be better to embrace and to work with and to help them and use them as kind of a red team for us. And so that's one thing. We just started a cybersecurity clinic at Tufts University. And so that is a year-long program, and we're partnering with nonprofits, and the students actually learn how to go and talk to them about cybersecurity and basically providing free consulting help on doing risk assessments and things like that, and helping them put some basic controls in place. And I've always been a huge fan of hiring students as interns into work into our SOC. And also into our development team. And so we've definitely benefited from getting their involvement.
And I'll just add, we have a really small cyber team. It totals 3, but we have one student intern that works with the team pretty much year round and also in the summer. And they help with things like phishing campaigns and other stuff. So they're actually getting practical experience, but maybe advising our team on what might be more relevant if we're doing a phishing campaign to students versus employees, and communication and cybersecurity awareness month. So it works out really well.
Yeah, and I think that's a great, as we come in, we're almost you look at the calendar, we're almost in October for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And I think engaging the students, I was at a Know Before conference in Boston last week, and one of the things they were talking about was introducing student modules that are mobile first and more student centric for both K through 12 and higher ed, which is interesting, right? Different messaging around those lines. So I think having that engagement certainly helps with our messaging and involvement. And the second part of the question, sort of, I think, Patty, you just mentioned it, sort of understaffed or small staffs, right? And that burnout and workload, and how we can augment and help with that with students. But how are you all sort of navigating budget constraints, resource constraints, understaffed? And maybe that's a good way to talk about what you guys are doing, tools, anything that sort of helps with all of those things.
Sure. So I'll jump in. So when I first got to Babson 2 years ago, we took a look at what we were using from a security stack, and we had tools that were all over the place. So we actually consolidated to the Microsoft stack with most of their security tools, and we saved a significant amount of money. And we had already had a vendor that we used for SOC services 24/7, but it wasn't that great. And with the savings, we moved to another vendor, and we leverage Arctic Wolf, and it is a huge benefit for my security team because they're monitoring stuff 24/7. They're taking care of all the tier 1 stuff. My team only gets a call if it's like a tier 2 or a tier 3, which then helps, cut down with the burnout issues and things like that. So having a 24/7 partner, especially if you've got a small school, I think is really helpful in dealing with that. And it gives the team more time to focus on other things instead.
Awesome. Dave or Lorna?
Sure, I can jump in real quick. From like a overworked, understaffed perspective, I have biweekly one-on-ones with my staff, and this sounds very corny, so please bear with me. But I always ask the same following 4 questions. Are you having fun? Do you feel valued? What can I do to better support you? And what feedback do you have for me? I strongly feel those first 2 questions, do you feel valued and are you having fun? I really feel if we're getting those right, then a lot of other things kind of fall into place for us. Across the entire IT division, we have an initiative called Technovation, which is technology innovation. So every employee in the IT division can spend 1 day a month working on a Technovation project. So it's not mandatory across the division, but it is mandatory in my department. the requirements are, it needs to be something that someone's passionate about, something that they can get excited about, but also improves security. Across the division, a lot of times security can kind of be a tough gig because we're tasked with influencing outside the span of our direct control. So an idea I started socializing a while ago that's starting to gain some traction. And I'm looking for a good name for this. So if anyone has a really good name that's not audit, please let me know. Is to pretty much not only document our controls, but to choose which controls we want to kind of validate in the cadence that we want to validate them. So for example, macros are disabled by default. So how often do we go back and check to ensure that all those macros are disabled by default? I know it kind of sounds like I'm saying, what this fire needs is more fire. But when people are working really hard and tickets are coming in and project work is coming in and deadlines are coming up, mistakes can happen. So, not having enough time budgeted to kind of, go back and check something can increase someone's stress. So I guess the short version of this is I'm trying to create a win-win with overworked staff and insecurity initiatives as well.
Maybe someday AI will be able to help you with that. And the cynic in me was going to ask you what's the response when the answer is no to either one of the first two questions you ask. But knowing you, I doubt you ever get a no, because I'm sure you're keeping them happy and they're feeling valued working for and with you. So I'll skip that, or we can have another webinar on that maybe some other time.
Yeah, it's also good too as a reminder for me as well, because I'm not just asking them, I'm kind of reminding myself as well.
Well, I can jump in.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I have done within my team and I advocate for across our organization is we need to be first open to talking about burnout and stress and being supportive of that, and how do we address the causes. So, the first step is recognizing that there's a problem. The second step is being willing to talk about it. And the third is, what are you going to do? So, some of the things that we've been doing is trying to lighten up on our employees, giving a lot more flexibility in work times, setting up like no meeting Fridays, so people actually have a time where they can plan on not having meetings. At least most of us can. And things like that. The other thing is taking across our organization and then within my team is taking a hard look at what is causing a lot of frustration, and the things that are, and a lot of the frustration usually is because the time and effort you're putting into it does not give much reward. It's more firefighting. So we're focusing a lot of trying to talk about those scenarios, those things that are having people bring them up so we can talk about it, and then what can we do with it, and even some minor tweaks of things that we try to do to change. And another last thing that then in my team, I'm continually trying to talk about is what can we stop doing, so we can focus more on the things that we all know and feel are really important. So what can we stop doing, and being really judicious about that. And then helping my people, recognizing and applauding them. Hey, great. I know you're getting up in the morning early and working, and then you're taking lunch to go do a break, and holding very tightly to try to recognize and respect their choices for their work times, and flexing their work.
And I'll leave it for Patty or Alex. I know, Alex, when you were a clerk, you were sort of, when we talk about small staff, you might have been it. So do you want to?
Yeah, so
talk
the
about your
smaller
experience?
institutions struggle with this a lot, especially in lieu of the recent FAFSA debacle and low enrollment at much of the institutions. There's definitely constraints on IT operating budgets within all of higher education right now. I think where I've seen the greatest growth is leveraging your resources. And we've talked a lot about the student-run SOCs, and we've talked about student-run pen tests. It's a great opportunity for students to learn and for faculty to teach, even staff to teach in the IT departments as well, who may not get face-to-face interaction with the students. There's a lot of value that comes from understanding the needs of the community, and in working with those students and those thought leaders and partners is really resourceful and really unique opportunity. The other thing is third parties helping. So for example, Compass helps with vCISO work. I think it's a great opportunity as well for a lot of the smaller institutions that may not necessarily have the staff or resources to dedicate to a full-time employee. The vCISO services that we offer obviously take over a lot of that burden from the smaller institutions. It's really great in helping track, different compliance and security and privacy needs. So that's one area that I have seen a lot of growth in the smaller institutions, is kind of handling that out into different MSSPs and whatnot as well. So I think burnout is a real thing. So is alert fatigue in reviewing a lot of the different platforms. I can't recall if it was Lauren or Patty talking about this, but different institutions, what's being talked about quite often now is they don't have the staff to go into their Splunk dashboards or to read their seams and stuff like that. Alarms go off, at different times of the day. It could even be, 2 o'clock in the morning. Do you have someone operating a 24/7 center that can get in there and review it? And then the question is, do they take action rather than just telling you that there's an alarm going off? So that's another thing that is a real issue that a lot of the institutions are getting better at working about. So that's kind of what I've seen.
Yeah, and I'll just wrap. I agree with everything that Alex, Lauren, and David said. I think the only other thing that I would add is if you don't have the funds to hire out a 24/7 SOC, even for leverage a student SOC, I think AI is going to offer a lot of possibilities in the security space as well. Like if you can automate the playbooks and shut things down so you can get rid of the tier 1 stuff that's freeing up your team, and you can leverage AI to automate that. I think that will help down the road. But again, that takes resources, but outsourcing certain aspects like PCI, we just don't have the time or bandwidth to deal with PCI in-house. So we work with vendors to help us manage that. And so if there's pieces that you can, small chunks you can leverage your partners for, I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, and I think, I think the leveraging partners, leveraging each other, the community, right? The 4 of you sort of pillars in the community people can come to, not to overwhelm your inboxes that are already overwhelmed, but just being able to share what you've learned. I think that's the importance of us trying to gather today. Each of you mentioned, Ren ISAC a couple of times. We know EDUCAUSE, NERCOMP in the Northeast. Are there other group in certainly CyberTrust Mass, Dave, and the things they're doing within the state of Massachusetts? I'm optimistic that maybe Connecticut and Rhode Island can replicate that good work at some point in the future. But are there other groups, anything else from a community standpoint that folks should be thinking about as we sort of wrap up, right? Really that, engaging vendors, the vendors that you trust, right? It's a symbiotic relationship, right? You have to have a trust relationship. So just sort of give you a few minutes as we sort of get toward time to summarize, what your thoughts are there, and then we'll open up if there are any questions that the attendees have.
I'll say just a really quick shout out. There's a higher ed information security officer council here in Massachusetts. It's open to folks in other states connecting to us as well historically. If you want to join it and you are a higher ed, just send me an email and I can connect you with the chair and co-chair of that group.
Excellent.
And I want to add to that really quick. Also, twice a year in New England, higher ed has security camp. It's free. It's an all-day event. It's kind of a part of that group, but even non-security people who have security type responsibilities at other parts of your institution can attend. So that's for higher ed institutions. So please.
Was it the 20th? Was it 20th year this year, right? Was that what they're celebrating?
20 or 25, I can't remember. But yes, it was a big anniversary this year for us getting together.
And for those of you who don't know, so the spring one is always hosted at Boston College around the time of spring break, and then BU hosts the summer one that's usually, unfortunately, when the Red Sox are on the road, sometime in August. For those of us in Connecticut looking for an excuse to get to Boston. But great, such a community, Lauren. I think that's the best. The talks are always really great and cool. They're usually cool talks. But just being able to network with 75, 100 people that are misery loves company, peers that are struggling with the same challenges that we all have. So that's a great call out. Thank you for that.